So, going to talk about a few things, 5 things that I think will help, because with all this noise going on and all the stress going on, we have to just take that step back and start to think, okay, how do we manage ourselves through that, our farm through that, and the like. I don't have them numbered because it depends on where your farm is, what your situation is, and what the stresses are that you're facing. What could be the most important for one is not very important for another. So it's all dependent on where you are. So let's start jumping into some of these management tips, if you will. So as I said, our working group does the cost of production. We're in the curling club. Please pick up your guide. As I joke, you've already paid for it, so you might as well come and get one. I work with my manager, Roy Arnott. Give a wave, Roy. So if you don't like what I have to say, that's the guy you talk to. But seriously, we really take pride in this, and it's something that we work really hard. And how we price this, or how we create this document, is we do it just like how a producer would do it. So for all the operating costs, we call input retailers. We have a network of input retailers we work with. We get farmer pricing, if you will, air quotations, on seed, fert, chem, all those operating costs. And then we go and we assign a cost to fixed cost. Fixed cost is highly variable amongst farms. Our number will be bigger than a cash fixed cost for a farmer that's, let's say in the last few years of their farming career, versus ours might be a little bit low compared to someone who's starting out, or a farmer that's taken on a lot of debt to undertake a major expansion. So it all depends on your situation. Of course, producers' numbers are better than our numbers. Our numbers are just there for starter material and for debate and conversation. But that's how we come up with the pricing. And we can see here in our costing, and this is over the last few years, that the cost, the input cost, the total cost to grow a crop took that big jump up a few years ago, and they've softened over the last few years, but they haven't really come down that much. I will admit it annoys me when I talk to people on the fringe of the industry and say, oh, you know what, it's not that bad, these costs have come down. Well, they have come down, but they just haven't come down very much. And they remain that sticky, stubborn high. And that's something that it's very important, and as producers, I think, producers know it, but the people that are servicing the industry, I think it's important for them to know too, about how it's still a costly crop to grow, even considering they've come down a little bit. Here's these are the top 6 crops grown in the province. You can see the profit ranking at the bottom. Other than barley, actually most of them, when we take a fully costed document, fully costed means we're having, $200 an acre, thereabouts of land and equipment fixed costs. We're including that in there, and that's going to be different for different folks. But you'll see here that most of these crops, after we've taken that consideration, are losing $30 to $50 an acre. Again, we'll ignore barley out of that list there, but that's generally what we find. Some of the challenges, and you'll see some of the pricing up there. The pricing is for fall 2025 delivery new crop, okay? So that's not old crop pricing or pricing we see now, that's new crop. We took these prices in the month of November, and it's hard to peg that number down. In the month of November, canola new crop ranged from $12 to $14. And I would say just look at the last 2 weeks of trading, we've pretty much seen that again, but in a compressed time with challenges with the trade issues, and then the 45Z credits down in the States, and whether canola oil will be accepted or not. This has really thrown a lot of fluctuation into this pricing. I was looking this morning, we're about $13.50 new crop, but again, we're at $13.25 here. So these numbers range wildly. So last week when I was giving a presentation, new crop was $14, and it looked like canola's a hero. And then, today walking through egg days, everyone's grumbling about canola. So, it all depends on the day. We'll see what happens with the markets. The yields that we use in this document are from Manitoba Ag Services Corporation, Agri Insurance, yield data throughout the province, and we just round the numbers to come up with some numbers to come up with some ideas. So we're always telling everybody, I'm sure everybody rolls their eyes whenever I roll into the room and say, have you done your cost of production? Have you done your cost of production? But it's pretty important because there's some pretty neat things that you can do with it. One is figuring out break-even yield and, trying to figure out how you're going to achieve some of those yields. That's the challenge, right? I like to think of these break-even yields. It tells me how realistic my plans are, how realistic for profitability. This time of year, for swing acres, I can look at some of these numbers and think, you know what, I have a better chance of getting 70 bushel spring wheat than I do of getting 50 bushel canola, or the other way around, or whatever the case may be, and start making up some of those decisions. But the number that I really like is the break-even prices. So break-even prices are your cost divided by your yield. So if at this time of year we're looking at projections, so that would be our projected yield. Once the combines have rolled through, we actually know our actual yields, we know our actual costs, we can then actually figure out what our actual cost per bushel is. So figuring out that cost per bushel sold is pretty important, and I'll be talking a little bit about that a little bit later in the presentation. But if we're looking at picking on poor canola again, we're over 14 bucks a bushel break even, counting our fixed costs. So again, remember that's counting fixed costs. We can see that that's the struggles that we have, but that's the struggles that we have for all these crops. And I talk to people who say, well, okay, I'm maybe I'm going to move out of canola acres, and the next question is, but then what acres are you going to move into? And that's some of the challenge that we have. So that's what we're up against. So what's those costs a bushel sold? So what does that calculate out to? And then I like to tell people, let's do a few scenarios. Let's do a low, average, and then slightly above average. The low might be something like 80-85% of your probable yield, right before acre insurance premiums kick or indemnities kick in. Take the average, and then let's go say 15% above average. And the above average one is a bit of a litmus test, if you will, to say, okay, even if we get above average crops, is it probable that we'll see a return? And even if we're projecting above average crops, we still can't see a return with these prices, and we got to look at the farm, look at the crop choice, and make some hard decisions. The other thing is it allows us to easily gauge decisions on the farm. So if I'm going to run out, buy a new combine, that's going to affect my cost structure. How is that going to translate into our cost per bushel sold? If my cost per bushel sold goes up, that makes me a little less competitive. It means there's going to be a little less money on the table for me, or it means that if I can't sell into that, I might be taking a loss, it might be more of a loss. And at the end of the day, the idea is to become more competitive. So as producers, we like to say that, community and we're friends and everything like that, but at the end of the day, we're also competing for the same land and the same equipment. And if we have that high cost, we just don't have as much money on the table to be competitive for that, or to invest in technology on the farm, whatever the case may be. So we have to be aware of that and knowing how that costing and how our break-even works into that. Because if I'm a high-cost producer and I all of a sudden need $14.75 a bushel, and right now that means I'm $1.25 under just my break-evens, it's just going to be hard to make up that ground. Grain markets. Okay, we're going to jump into grain markets. Data you see behind you is from our Manitoba markets page through Manitoba Agriculture. It's from August 2020 through to the end of December 2024. These are weekly closes, so this doesn't capture the interweek highs and lows, and it doesn't capture the interday highs or lows. So this is kind of just showing a little bit more of a trend, if you will. And what we can see is we can see that trend just trending down. And we can see that, we had some, pretty high highs there, but we're steadily coming off that. And if we kind of drill down, boil into some more data, we look at August 2023 data. So this is like the last crop year and a half, if you will. We can still see that there's this softening of prices. Oats has kind of held on not too bad, but some of the other crops have softened up. And think back to that canola chart at the beginning of the presentations with the highs and the lows, and that's some of the challenges that we face with these grain markets. So when we're thinking about this, I think it's pretty important to consider our costs on carry for storage. So why do we store? Well, there's a few reasons. One is that, we're maybe deferred months out, so a few months out, the grain price is higher than what it is now. It's usually the case at harvest, not always, but usually. The other thing is it buys us time to speculate, buys us time to hope that the price goes up, that we can price in some little bit better pricing. Just like I tell my kids, nothing's for free in life, and it's all about choices. The choices here is that we do have interest cost on that. We do have the chance that that grain in the bin can spoil. And we also lose the access to that money or the cash because it's tied up in storage. So it's nice to be able to figure out what those costs are. And if we figure it out using today's interest rates, generally speaking, they're about 5 to 8 cents per bushel per month. So 5 cents would be something like a wheat, 8 cents would be canola. So we can then start to say, okay, if we're gonna price wheat, 4 months out and 5 cents, so 20 cents, we gotta be able to at least meet that. And if we're not, then the question is, why are we doing that? Because the market's essentially signaling us to deliver now versus paying us to carry it, right? Because there is that cost to carry. And an old timer told me this, he goes, think of it like, what's the purpose of this? So just think of this, you got a 30,000 bushel bin of wheat, so that's 5 cents per bushel per month or $50 a day. So he says every time you go out for coffee in the morning, take a $50 bill out of your wallet and throw it in the jar. He says that's what you got to get back for holding that. There has to be a reason and purpose to be holding that grain. And if there is no pricing opportunities, we need access to that cash, all those types of things, we really have to start asking ourselves, is that worth it? So I just ask people to kind of think of it in those terms with storage. Market for a purpose. And there's a lot of grain marketing firms out there. We're not going to get into the depths of grain marketing here, but again, it's about marketing with a purpose and knowing what that costs for the operation. Land. Get lots of questions on land. The data that you see here is the Farm Credit Canada Farmland Value Report. This is for Manitoba. These are the average land increases over the last handful of years. The 2024 is the midterm number because we don't have the end of year number in yet. So we can see that there is some pretty heady increases in there. I do get a lot of comments in 21, 22, 23 that people say, I'm surprised it wasn't higher considering the grain prices. But I also think that's a part of the costs that were around for fertilizer, chem, equipment, things like that. And that might have kind of kept a cap on some of that. So just because it happened so quick, and then essentially it got taken away from us too quick for a lot of our liking. But looking at that, we can see what some of the average land value increases are for Manitoba. So I get questions about this on presentations. What's land's worth? What's land worth? What should I pay for it? How is it so high? So here's a few answers, maybe not answers to some of these questions. So if we look at the last 25 years using that FCC data, we can see that the Manitoba valuation increases were 7.95% in that 25-year span. Okay? So let's assume, this might be a pretty big assumption, but let's assume before any land costs on our farm and any withdrawal or profit, we have $250 an acre. And again, that might be a pretty big number, but let's just say that's what it is, sake of argument. Stay with me on this 250. If we were to look at saying that's what we make each year for 25 years with these appreciation rates, what would that mean? It would mean about $2,700 an acre of land value. So people around here are looking and saying, yeah, like $2,700, I remember that's what it was like 25 years ago, not what it is now. But my farming career is 40 years. So you know what, farmers take long view of things. So let's look at 40 years. Over 40 years, it's 5.43%. Got to remember that number's lower because we had some, remember the 80s? Not everybody remembers the 80s. Some people weren't around in the 80s, but the ones that do remember the 80s, well, there are some minus signs in the land appreciation numbers in that time span, so that's what brings that number down. But you know what? 40 years, that's a farming career, let's call it, $250 an acre. Maybe that's optimistic, but you know what? We're farmers. That's what we do. We be optimistic. That would be just over $4,000 an acre. And why I bring these numbers is not to say this is what we should be paying for land, because this is not what we're paying for land. The thing is to know what this number is and to know the productive value from a dollars and cents point of view, because if this was the case, then most of us wouldn't be able to buy land. We wouldn't even make it to the kitchen table to put a bid, or you wouldn't even make it to the bidding round, whatever the case may be. The idea behind this is to understand how much we're overpaying for land. And there could be good reasons for it. Land comes up once in a generation, sometimes once in every 2 generations. It's right across the lane, it's part that will make a larger parcel, whatever the case may be. There's some really good reasons out there. I'm not questioning any of those. That's not the point. The point is to know what we're committing our farm to when we make those purchases at that higher amount. And if we're paying 5, 7, 10 grand, whatever an acre for this land, then if that's our productive value, we're looking at needing bought and paid for acres, 2 or 3 bought and paid for acres, and taking the profit from those acres to subsidize the purchased acres. And that's fine. Again, we're in the long game here, but then that's less that can come to me or pay my wage. And now maybe I'm working for free, or now I can do this on debt servicing, but now I've stressed my farm. And I bought a half section on a large grain farm, and now I'm at the wall already, just because of that math. And that's the challenges that we have with land. So unfortunately, I don't have any easy answers on this. My easy answer is just to understand how it impacts your operation, and that this is so expensive that we have to be careful about how much of it we jump into at these values, because we can easily swamp the farm. And that's the challenge with that. Equipment. Talk about equipment at a show like this, eh? We'll see if I get invited back next year. Let's get into this. So I think about equipment. So let's take an example here. We're going to take a Class 8 combine, okay, with a 35-foot flex auger head. That's about $750 plus 80, just over $800,000. And this is all in our guide, our equipment guide. And again, those are at our booth at the curling club that you've already paid for the guide. So come pick one up. We're going to finance 50% of it. So that means 50% down. So that's a wallop in the pocket. A little bit of opportunity cost in there. We have our repair and maintenance at 2.63% for combines. That's of the value, and that's every year. And we're going to look at work rates, 15 acres an hour, we're going to assume with this, and 250 hours of use. So that work rate and hours of use is big, and I'm going to get to that in a minute. So we're at about, $30 an acre for a rental rate and almost 40 for custom. Custom in this case includes labor, includes fuel, and includes a little bit of margin on that. The margin, we have 15% in our guides. That's essentially unforeseen, if you will. So that's what we're going to go off. So let's start kind of poking and prodding this scenario and see what happens to our numbers. So I'll get, okay, Darren, that's nice, that's a big number. Just buy used. Buy a used combine for half as much. It's the same size of combine, does the same amount of work. You essentially, half your rental rate. You don't quite half your custom rate, because you still got to pay for the labor and the fuel. That doesn't get halved. That's, is what it is. But that's one way to save some money, and we can see here that it does. However, then I think we're using just this math in the book. This is one of the weaknesses, I think, in the guide, is that our our repair rate probably isn't high enough. And then maybe we should factor in a little bit of downtime, because all things being equal, a combine that's 7 or 8 years old, or whatever the case is for something valued 50% of new, probably isn't as reliable as a new one, right? Well, once you get the bugs out of the new one anyways. So that's something that we should consider, that we need to weigh this. But that is one way to save money, but it all depends. Everyone's situation is different. How about if we go from 50% financing to 75% financing? So we're financing some more. It actually only pushes up the cost a little bit. Think it'd be more, but when you look at it this way in terms of dollars per acre, I mean, if you cover enough acres, it does add up over time. But it's what's a little bit more, as I say, while we're at it, just put another zero on that check. Just as a note, in our guides, combines have a lifespan of 12 years before we consider them needing a major rebuild. That's how those repair rates work with that. So how about if we cut the interest rate? Remember the good old days of just a few years ago when interest rates were low? What happens if we go down with that? Well, we can see here again, if we cut that interest rate, we can see a few percentage points decrease on the costs. Keep in mind though, this is at 50%. If we were to finance more of that, obviously it's going to go up just because we're financing more, but it does have some impact. This, though, is where I think we really can move the value of equipment when we look at it on a per acre cost or a cost to the farm, and especially when we think about how much this stuff costs. So let's say we're going to decrease the work rate by a third. So that combine, instead of doing 15 acres an hour, 10 acres an hour. And so think of it, you have maybe someone who's not as confident in the combine, or someone who, isn't comfortable pushing the combine as much. We can start to see that, running over those acres, well, the dollars per hour rate's going to be the same, right? Because the acre meter doesn't care how many acres an hour you're doing, it just counts hours. If we look at it by per acre, those costs start to go up, and it starts to go up a lot. And this is where not getting full use out of this equipment with these equipment at these values gets to be very, very, very expensive. And that's also why people who are trying to sell you equipment will say, well, you know what, we've got to spread this over more acres. And, then you're on the treadmill of, okay, well, I got this big piece of equipment, now I got a few more acres, now I need, back and forth, and that's the challenges that we have. How about if we reduce the hours of use? The second combine, the backup tractor, as I like to call it, or whatever the case may be. So we go from 250 hours, this is a combine, down to 125 hours in a year. So 250 down to 125, we can see we bump up those costs quite a bit yet again. So I think the big thing about this is that, whatever the case is, if you're underutilizing that piece of equipment, if you're not using it enough, it's just kind of hanging around the farm. The nice to have, those things can be quite expensive. And obviously, the more expensive something is, it gets to be even more expensive on the farm. And that's the thing that I think that we have to be aware of, especially in tight situations. So 2 years ago, if we're making $250 an acre, to, have $30 an acre of inefficiency worked into the system, it wasn't such a big deal. So, okay, so instead of making $200 an acre, we only make 170, no big deal. But if we're looking at breaking even, that $30 an acre is the difference between breaking even and losing $30 an acre, and that's the challenge. And things have moved so quick, right? We've seen in those grain prices, things move so quick. The challenge that we have is to pivot our management into the cost price squeeze and the tighter margins that we have now. We got to do this sooner than later. I always make the analogy, it's kind of like a ship at sea, that if you do a course correction early, you have many more options available to you, versus if you do it late, you only have a few options available to you. So that's why it's important to do these numbers now. So if we're looking at purchases, whether it be technology, whether it be equipment, whatever the case is, whatever it is that you have to buy on the farm for that example, we should be looking at the cost-benefit analysis, right? We can figure out the costs. The costs are really easy to figure out. Often that number is actually figured out for us. It's slid across the table, and then we go and look at it, and then pick our jaw up off the floor and see what we can do with that. But that's essentially what this is. But it's much harder to figure out what the benefits are to us and to the farm. So I challenge everybody to come up with a dollar sign for those benefits. That's called, monetizing the benefits. Do we decrease labor? Do we increase some efficiencies? Do we have to run over the crop one less time? We can start to add this stuff up. Risk. Do we feel like our sleep at night is better with this? And I always joke with the sleep at night is like, how much are you willing to pay to get a good night's sleep? Because if you pay too much, you might actually be losing sleep because now you don't have any money. So it's about knowing these choices, right? And what we have in front of us. Because, at some point in time, especially because things have changed so quick, it gets to be difficult that if we find ourselves overcapitalized on equipment, what do we do? And the joke is, if you find yourself in a hole, first stop digging, right? But that's the challenge that we have. And the challenge I throw out there, and again, maybe this the Egg Day is not the venue for this with all that nice shiny equipment out there, but I bet you'll be around if you don't buy any equipment for 1 year. I bet you'll still be farming. You'll come up and see me, and maybe they'll have me back after my equipment rant, and maybe I'll be able to chat with you, and you can tell me that you're still going for 1 more year. I think that's something that we can look at for our equipment. And the equipment companies, you already see that now. All the major manufacturers are talking about slowing down production and stuff like that. They're anticipating this. This is already here. This is just the way it is. So we got to look at that because you know what? We can, making money is nice, but I'd rather make me money rather than, the other guy. Fertilizer. Okay, off of one soapbox onto another. Here we go. Fertilizer. So, fertilizer costs. So, again, I get a little upset or a little tired when people tell me, oh, fertilizer's come down. So, why are we even worrying about fertilizer? The charts that you see behind you are urea prices. The bar chart is our survey. We do a survey twice a year in October and then April. We price out the fall, the previous fall, and then the spring. So I'll give you an example. For the 2024 crop, we would have priced in October 23, and then that was the previous fall, and then April of 24, so that spring. Generally speaking, it's cheaper in the fall than the spring. There's 1 year in there that doesn't. It seems about every 10 to 15 years there's that inversion. 2008 it happened as well, where fertilizer is actually cheaper in the spring. But generally speaking, it's cheaper in the previous fall. The line charts that you see on the other side, that's the affordability. So that is at those Manitoba market prices, how many bushels of grain it takes to purchase, in this case, 1 ton of urea. And the dotted line is the average amount, and we can see with wheat on top, canola on the bottom, we can look and see that urea is still more expensive than what it is on average that we've seen over the handful of years. So price of urea has come down, but the price of grain has come down as well, and that's the challenge we see with that. But this one here is the pretty chart. I'm going to move to FOSS. It's the ugly chart. FOSS, again, our fertilizer survey on the bar charts, it's come down, but only a little bit. It's still really expensive. When we look at those line charts, FOSS is really expensive when we consider the price of grain. So again, those line charts are how many bushels of grain is required to purchase 1 ton of FOSS in this case, and we're at some pretty significant highs. FOSS is very expensive. So one of the things that I think that we have an opportunity with is using 4Rs. We've heard 4Rs with sustainability for the environment. I will tell everybody for as long as I can, environmental sustainability is good, but we need economic sustainability on the farm before we can tackle that. So let's talk about 4Rs from an economic sustainability on our farm. So generally what we have with 4Rs is we have kind of two camps. It's too expensive or too hard to ban, or it's too expensive or too much to not ban. So let's look at camp one. It's too expensive to ban. So if we're looking at, say, broadcasting or whatever, well, we have to be prepared. There's some extra fertilizer losses, right? So maybe just to back up, one of the best things about fertilizer is that it has this inherent set of properties. So essentially, the closer you apply it to when the crop needs it, under the ground in, say, band form, the less environmental loss that you have. That's why everyone's talking about environmental benefits with 4Rs. But I care about the dollars, and if you have less loss to the environment, that means you have more available to your crop, and you have less loss to your pocketbook as well. And that's essentially what we're talking about. So on this, we'll have less loss with banding, but we have increased losses with broadcasting. So we have to be prepared for that. If we don't compensate for that by putting down a little bit more fertilizer, we have the potential to under-fertilize our crop and have a little bit lower yield. Where there's increased potential for off-target movement. I live close to Lake Winnipeg, and FOSS in the lake is very important there, so that's a risk. And with the nitrogen, we can use inhibitors to protect it from volatilizing away into the atmosphere, but that costs money because, again, nothing's for free in life. On the other side, for those who say it's too expensive not to ban, well, there's higher equipment costs because we have to ban it. We have to physically place it in the soil. So there is that. We have workload issues. It takes more, especially if we're doing it in spring. That's a busy time of year. And even if we're doing it in fall, there's still work that's required. We could have a longer seeding period because in spring if we're spring applying because we can't seed as many acres in a day. And if we're spring applying, we're sensitive to fertilizer interruptions. So let's take a look at impact. So let's go through the 4 R's. First one is right source. So that's just the type that you use. If we look at different end sources, it's hard for producers to move between end sources, right? Might be able to move a little bit, but often there's only a handful of dollars per acre on the source. Or if we use inhibitors, if that's $10 an acre, whatever the case may be, there's $5-10 an acre that we can save there. Timing, if we move to spring versus fall banding, not saying that that's bad, not at all, but if we can move it to spring banding, with nitrogen, we see sometimes 10-20% efficiency gain because we just don't have those losses. So, based on that, that may be a $20 bill an acre if we're moving, from fall to spring. If we're moving for a placement, so we're going banding in the soil versus broadcasting on top of the soil, FOSS is the big one. The recommendations for broadcasting FOSS versus banding is twice as much. So twice as much. And remember those FOSS numbers, how ugly they were? Well, your chart would go off the top if you have to broadcast that. So banding has a real big benefit. And one of the things that I know a lot of familiar faces here and what I've talked about before is I think with FOSS, talk to your agronomist, talk to our extension staff, but really look at maxing out the seed safe FOSS rates in the seed row because that's where you get your best bang for your buck. It has a pop-up effect and everything, but if you're concerned about seed safe rates, again, speak with your specialist, but that gives you the best bang for your buck, and then spill everything else into the mid-row band, whatever the case may be, because again, that broadcasting, that might help you in the future, but it doesn't really help you too much in the current, and that could be the challenge with that. And the last one is right rate, is that we need to maintain our yields in these tight margin years. We can turn a $20 or $30 an acre problem into a $70 an acre problem if we start to have yield slippage because we're starting to shave on certain things and not have those yields that we need. So that's something that's pretty important on our end. Nothing in life is for free though. Equipment costs money. If it's going to cost you, $40,000, $500,000, depending on what you're doing. I make the joke about, okay, you're gonna mid-row band fertilizer, so now you need mid-row banders. Oh, and now you need dual shoot. Oh, now you need another fan on it. Oh, now you need a new tractor because your hydraulic capacity is not enough, and on and on and on and on. That's the challenge. I'm not saying that's not a challenge, but maybe there's something that we can look at that gets us a little bit further to the goal of trying to do a bit more banding. Extra labor, so we've switched our farm over to 100% spring application, so one pass, and I joke that there's like the military supply chain behind me. There's two grain trailers, a split Super B, then the anhydrous truck coming behind, and it's like it's a party out in the field with all the vehicles that are out there. I'm not saying it's easy, but you know what? With these high fertilizer prices, we definitely got to look at stuff like that. If we can't get our logistics down, we can't get our efficiencies down, and it takes us longer to seed, well, there's a cost to that too. Again, I'm in the Interlake, one rain, and we could be seeding wheat later, and if we're seeding wheat a week later, we might see a 10% yield hit on that wheat that we seed later, so there's something to that too. So we got to consider all these things. So some takeaways. So I'm going to two more slides here, or a couple more slides, Lori, to wrap up. World has changed rapidly in such a short period of time. This is something that I actually am concerned about, that we need to pivot our management to the tight margins. Talk to some of the more experienced farmers in the crowd, and they'll be like, oh yeah, we've seen this before, we got through it, we'll get through it again, for sure. But there's a few things that have been different this year, or this time, the last couple of years. One is we switched really quick. That's a big thing. Another thing is that we went from some pretty profitable years to tight years, again, in that short period of time. And the last thing is the cost of everything. The costs are just crazy. You go to the dealership for parts and you walk out with an armful and it's into the thousands of dollars. It's you feel like you should at least be needing a forklift to load a few $1,000s of parts into the truck when you can actually do it with one arm, throwing it in the back seat. That's what the challenges we have with the world that has changed so quick. I believe that knowing the costs of production is a foundational piece. I will get pushback from people saying, well, you know what, I just market. Why do I need to know my cost of production? I just market when I think I have profitable times and I'll just go from there. For me, it's the sleep at night factor, it's the security, and I do believe that there's going to be some opportune times for marketing, but if we know our numbers, these times might be fewer and farther between, so we can jump on them if we know our numbers and we can make a good pricing decision in a shorter period of time. Because that's that marketing discipline that we're going to need, considering the challenge that we face. So again, snap decisions. I think there's going to be profitability out there, but it's volatile. We got to pay attention, know what's going on, and make that decision and not look back. Understand the impact of land purchase on your farm. Again, if you're going to try to justify it based on the productive value, I don't know if you're ever going to if you're ever going to do that. Now, never is a big word, but I'm not sure we're going to be there anytime soon. So if we're going to make those purchases, know what we're giving up in terms of cash, future competitiveness, things like that, and make sure it's a good decision that we're making on the farm. We need to look at these equipment capitalization rates. Again, when we're making $250 an acre, it's easy to justify a lot of things on the farm. When we're breaking even, it gets to be a lot harder to do that. Fertilizer has some inherent properties that we can stretch it a little bit further if we do it properly. And hopefully we can do that. Yes, that helps the environment, and the environment folks like that, and that's good, but it helps us in our pocketbook. And economic sustainability can lead to environmental sustainability. But you know what, we take care of ourselves from that end, and some good things can happen. So with that wraps up my presentation. I think I had to 145 or 140. That was pretty close. I do have a number of other presentations if any of you folks are out and around. We are in the curling club. Don't be afraid to pop by. I'll be around in that area afterwards. Is there any questions, comments, rotten tomatoes to throw? Pretty good at dodging things. I work for the government, so I'm here with the government, here to help. Yes?
Got any templates online to help with the cost calculations?
Templates online for cost calculations? Yes, we do have an Excel version of our cost of production with the big table. We have another thing called Crop Plan, and that's more tailored to individual farms, so you can put in the different crops that you grow, even by field basis if you want. What I like about that one is you can tailor it a little bit more, because you know we have different fertilizer rates for different crops on the farm. We can get right down to, you know, if not commodity specific profitability, field specific profitability. And the other real thing I like in that crop plan template is it has a grain marketing section where you can record your sales, and it will give you a weighted average of your pricing, and then based on your cost structure, it'll tell you what your break-even price is for the remaining unpriced grain. So it gives a little bit more security, if you will, for when you're making these marketing decisions. And again, I think about comfort in decision making and taking away some of that stress. You know, stress is tough, and that's something that, you know, we're talking more about. I still don't think we talk enough about, you know, how much stress that, you know, these prices put us under. So if we can start doing things like that to take a little bit of stress out of our life just gets a little bit easier. So crop plan and then our crop COP, and if you internet search those, you should find them right away. Yeah, or call Lori. She's a wonderful person to speak to, and she will gladly refer you on or email you a link if you provide your email address, whatever the case may be. She's a great resource to our department. We're lucky to have her. Anything else? Well, thank you very much. Again, I'm in the curling club. If anyone needs to chat with me afterwards, it's a pleasure being here. I appreciate all of you fine folks showing up, and let's hope that we have a good year, and good luck to everyone out there. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Darren. That was really great.